In the year 1451, in a troubled corner of medieval Spain, a child was born who would one day change the destiny of the entire world. Her name was Isabella of Castile. At the time of her birth, Castile was a kingdom torn apart by weak leadership, corruption, and bitter rivalries. The throne itself was unstable, and the crown weighed heavily on her half-brother, King Henry IV, who was nicknamed the Impotent, a king despised by nobles and distrusted by his people. Isabella grew up in this atmosphere of chaos, a young princess who seemed unlikely ever to rise to power. Her early childhood was marked by poverty compared to royal standards. She and her younger brother Alfonso were kept away from court, far from the luxuries enjoyed by most royals. Instead, Isabella was raised on simple meals, surrounded by strict religious instruction and the cold shadows of political uncertainty. But from these harsh beginnings, something extraordinary was forged. Isabella grew into a young woman of iron will, deep faith, and an intelligence that far surpassed her peers. She learned patience, she learned to observe, and above all, she learned to endure. As the years passed, discontent with King Henry's rule grew. His failure to produce a clear heir, and the whispers that his daughter, Juana, was not truly his blood but the child of another man, plunged Castile into deeper crisis. Many of the nobles turned their eyes toward Isabella and her brother Alfonso as potential saviors of the realm. When Alfonso died suddenly under mysterious circumstances, suspicion spread like wildfire. Had he been poisoned? Was his death a political assassination? No one could prove it, but one fact was undeniable. Isabella was now the only serious rival to Henry's crumbling rule. At just 16 years old, Isabella was thrust into the dangerous Game of Thrones. Ambitious kings and powerful noble families across Europe now sought her hand in marriage, not for love but for power. The Portuguese king wanted her. The French courtiers pressed their suit. Even her half-brother Henry tried to control her marriage for his political advantage. But Isabella was not a pawn to be moved across the board. She resisted, she calculated, and she waited for the moment to make her own choice. That choice came in the form of Ferdinand, the young Prince of Aragon. Ferdinand was bold, clever, and ambitious, much like Isabella herself. Their marriage in 1469 was more than just a union of two hearts. It was the joining of two powerful kingdoms, Castile and Aragon. Together they would become the Catholic monarchs, the rulers who would unify Spain under one crown. Yet this marriage was not celebrated by all. King Henry and his supporters saw it as a threat, and war soon followed. The Castilian War of Succession erupted, a brutal conflict that pitted Isabella and Ferdinand against Henry's daughter, Juana, and her powerful allies in Portugal. The war dragged on for years. Armies clashed, cities burned, and Spain was drenched in blood. But Isabella's determination never wavered. She rode with her troops, she inspected supplies, she strategized with her generals. This was not a queen hiding behind palace walls. This was a woman who fought as fiercely as any king before her. By 1479 the war was over. Isabella had triumphed. She was crowned Queen of Castile, and with Ferdinand by her side as King of Aragon, a new era in Spain had begun. But this was only the beginning. The rise of Isabella was not just the rise of a queen, it was the dawn of a reign that would bring both unimaginable glory and unspeakable terror. A reign that would change the course of world history forever. When Isabella and Ferdinand secured their crowns, Spain was not yet the mighty empire it would become. The Christian north was united under their rule, but in the south, the last great Muslim stronghold still stood. Granada, the jewel of Al-Andalus. A city of learning, poetry, and science, but also the final symbol of Muslim rule in Spain. For more than 700 years, Muslim dynasties had flourished on the Iberian Peninsula. Cities like Córdoba and Seville had once been centers of art and knowledge that rivaled the great capitals of the world. But by the late 15th century only Granada remained. And Isabella was determined to bring it under her cross. She believed it was not merely politics but destiny. A holy mission entrusted to her by God. To complete the Reconquista, the centuries-long struggle to reclaim Spain for Christianity. The campaign began in 1482. For 10 years, armies marched, castles fell, and villages were consumed by fire. Ferdinand led troops into battle, while Isabella organized supplies, managed war councils, and financed the campaigns by pawning her own jewels. This was no passive queen, this was a monarch of action. Soldiers revered her, for she did what few rulers dared, she stood among them. Granada, though weakened, was not defenseless. Its ruler, Boabdil, fought desperately to preserve his city. He forged alliances, resisted sieges, and even turned against his own father in the chaos of internal strife. But against the relentless force of Isabella and Ferdinand, resistance grew weaker with each passing year. Finally, in January 1492, the walls of Granada trembled for the last time. The Muslim Emir Boabdil surrendered the keys of the city. The banner of Castile was raised high above the Alhambra. Trumpets sounded, bells rang across Spain. The Reconquista was complete. Isabella had done what no ruler before her had managed. She united Spain under the Catholic crown. For her, it was the fulfillment of a divine promise. For her people, it was a moment of triumph and glory. But for the Muslims and Jews of Spain, it marked the beginning of despair. The fall of Granada was followed swiftly by harsh decrees. Conversions, expulsions, and the shadow of the Inquisition began to spread across the land. For now, however, Isabella basked in victory. She was hailed as the defender of the faith, the Catholic queen chosen by God. She had given Spain a new identity, an identity rooted in one faith, one crown, one destiny. And yet, even as the streets of Granada echoed with the chants of victory, Isabella's gaze was already turning outward, beyond the mountains of Spain, beyond the seas, to lands unknown. A world awaited discovery and conquest. Victory in Granada crowned Isabella as the savior of Christian Spain. But triumph was not enough for the queen. She wanted more than unity, she wanted purity. Isabella believed her kingdom could only be strong if it was united under one faith. And so, with Ferdinand at her side, she turned to a weapon darker than any sword or cannon: the Spanish Inquisition. In 1478, with the blessing of Pope Sixtus IV, Isabella and Ferdinand established a tribunal unlike any the world had seen before. Its mission was simple: root out heresy, enforce Catholic orthodoxy, and eliminate those who dared to believe differently. At first, the Inquisition targeted conversos, Jews who had converted to Christianity but were suspected of secretly practicing their old faith. Then came the Moriscos, the Muslims who had outwardly accepted baptism but still clung to Islam in their hearts. Anyone could be accused. Neighbors denounced neighbors. Families turned on one another. Fear spread like a plague. The methods of the Inquisition were brutal. Prisoners were dragged from their homes, locked in dark cells, and subjected to interrogations. Torture was not only permitted, it was expected. Iron chains, racks, waterboarding, fire. The accused would confess anything just to end the suffering. And when the confessions were made, the punishment was swift and merciless. Burnings at the stake became public spectacles, attended by thousands. They were called autos de fe, acts of faith. But to the victims, they were acts of terror. In 1492, the same year Granada fell, Isabella issued the Alhambra decree. All Jews who refused to convert were ordered to leave Spain. Tens of thousands fled, abandoning homes, wealth, and history. Many died on the roads or at sea, betrayed by the land that had been theirs for centuries. To Isabella this was righteousness. To the victims it was ruin. And still the Inquisition grew stronger. Its shadow stretched across Spain, silencing voices, crushing dissent, and carving fear into the very soul of the nation. The queen who had been hailed as God's chosen now presided over one of the darkest chapters in European history. For some, she was Isabella the Catholic. For others, she was Isabella the tyrant. But history is never simple. Even as the fires of the Inquisition burned, Isabella's eyes turned to a different kind of fire. A fire that burned not on land but across the endless ocean. Whispers of a bold sailor reached her court. A man named Christopher Columbus claimed he could reach the riches of the East by sailing west. And Isabella, ever ambitious, ever daring, was about to gamble everything on a dream that would change the world forever. In the year 1492, as the fires of the Inquisition still smoldered, another fire was kindling in Queen Isabella's court, the fire of exploration. A foreign sailor named Christopher Columbus appeared before her. His idea was bold, almost mad: to sail west across the Atlantic Ocean and reach the riches of Asia. Most dismissed him as a dreamer, a fool chasing the horizon. But Columbus was persistent. For years he begged courts across Europe to sponsor his voyage. One by one they rejected him. Until, finally, he stood before Isabella. The queen listened. She weighed his words not only with logic but with vision. What if he was right? What if Spain could bypass the Muslim-controlled trade routes and reach Asia directly? What if, by her hand, Spain could rise above Portugal, above France, above all of Europe? At first she hesitated. The treasury was drained by war, the kingdom still healing from Granada. But Isabella was never one to bow to fear. And so, in a moment that would change history forever, she gave her answer. Yes. She pledged her support, even pawning her own jewels to help finance the expedition. With Ferdinand's cautious blessing and Isabella's unwavering faith, Columbus set sail in August of 1492. 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, disappeared over the horizon, carrying with them the weight of Spain's destiny. For weeks there was nothing but water. The sailors grew restless, mutinous. They cursed Columbus, they cursed Isabella. And then in October, a cry shattered the night. Land? Columbus had not found Asia. Instead, he had stumbled upon a world unknown to Europe. Islands filled with strange peoples, new riches, and endless possibilities. When he returned to Spain, he carried with him gold, exotic goods, and captives. But more than that, he carried the promise of empire. Isabella welcomed him like a hero. She saw in him the hand of God, guiding Spain to greatness. And so began the age of discovery, and the age of conquest. Voyage after voyage, Spanish ships sailed westward. New lands were claimed in the name of Isabella and Ferdinand. The cross of Christianity was planted, often by force, in the soils of the New World. For Isabella, this was destiny fulfilled. Spain was no longer just a kingdom of Europe, it was the seed of a global empire. But destiny has a price. While Isabella dreamed of spreading faith and power, her decision unleashed centuries of conquest, colonization, and suffering. For the native peoples of the Americas, her name would be remembered not as a savior, but as the spark of devastation. And yet in Spain, Isabella stood taller than ever. A queen who had united her land, purified her faith, and opened the gates to a new world. She was now, without question, one of the most powerful women to ever walk the earth. But power breeds enemies. Betrayals whispered through her court. Tragedy stalked her family. And as the years passed, even Isabella's iron will could not shield her from the cruelties of fate. By the mid-1490s, Isabella of Castile stood at the height of her glory. She had united Spain, crushed Granada, silenced dissent through the Inquisition, and opened the gates to a new world. To her people, she was Isabella la Católica, Isabella the Catholic, chosen by God to guide her kingdom. But behind the glittering crown lay shadows of pain, betrayal, and loss. Isabella's power was unshakable, yet her family became the stage for heartbreak. She dreamed of securing Spain's future by marrying her children into the royal houses of Europe. One by one, she arranged alliances that would stretch her dynasty across the continent. Her eldest daughter, Isabella of Aragon, was married to the heir of Portugal. A union meant to bring peace between kingdoms long divided. But tragedy struck. She died young, leaving behind grief and a fragile infant who too did not survive. Her second daughter, Joanna, was married into the powerful Habsburg dynasty. At first it seemed a brilliant match. But Joanna soon became known as Juana la Loca, Joanna the Mad. Whether it was true madness or the result of betrayal and abuse by her husband, Philip the Handsome, Joanna became a symbol of sorrow, not triumph. Isabella's son, Prince Juan, the long-awaited male heir of Castile and Aragon, was her greatest hope. Handsome, educated, beloved by the people. He was meant to inherit the united crown and carry forward Isabella's vision. But in 1497, at only 19 years old, Juan died suddenly. Spain mourned. The future Isabella had fought so hard to build began to fracture. And still the betrayals came. Nobles at court schemed in the shadows. Foreign powers circled like wolves. Even Ferdinand, her king and partner, sometimes moved behind her back, pursuing his own ambitions. Their marriage had been strong but not without cracks. Amid this turmoil, Isabella's health began to fail. The years of war, endless labor, and personal grief wore her down. She grew weaker, though her spirit never dimmed. Yet even as death crept closer, Isabella clung fiercely to her mission. She ordered that the Inquisition continue, that the purity of the faith be preserved, that Spain never turn back from the destiny she had carved. She was determined that her legacy would endure, no matter the cost. The queen who had once been the hope of Castile, the unifier of Spain, and the patron of discovery, was now a woman haunted by sorrow. Her victories had come at the price of her family, her peace, and her soul. In the final years of her life, Isabella's crown weighed heavier than ever. And as the end approached, she faced the greatest question of all. How would history remember her? As a savior? Or as a tyrant? Her answer would not be written by her hand, but by the centuries that followed. By the dawn of the 16th century, Queen Isabella of Castile had lived a life that reshaped the world. She was no longer the young princess who had once stood uncertain in a kingdom of chaos. She was the monarch who had united Spain, torn Granada from Muslim hands, unleashed the Inquisition, and opened the door to a new world. But in her final years, the strength that had carried her so far began to fade. Her health broke under the weight of sorrow. The deaths of her beloved children, the madness of her daughter Joanna, and the endless burdens of rule left her fragile. Her once commanding presence became shadowed by grief. On November 26, 1504, in the city of Medina del Campo, Isabella breathed her last. She was 53 years old. Her death sent shockwaves through Spain. The woman who had been its heart and soul was gone. Yet her presence lingered, in the laws she wrote, in the empire she forged, in the very identity of the nation. Isabella left strict instructions for her burial. She wished to be laid to rest not in grandeur, but in humility, dressed in the simple habit of the Franciscan order. She was buried beside her beloved Ferdinand in Granada, the city whose conquest had been her crowning triumph. But her spirit did not rest quietly. Her legacy would shape the destiny of millions. For Spaniards, Isabella was a saintly figure, a warrior queen, a defender of the faith. The Catholic Church even considered her for canonization. To them, she was Isabella la Católica, the chosen servant of God. Yet for others, her memory is far darker. To the Jews exiled from their homeland, to the Muslims driven from Granada, to the indigenous peoples of the Americas who faced conquest and devastation, Isabella's reign was the spark of centuries of suffering. She was both savior and destroyer, a queen of glory and of shadows. 5 centuries later, her name still echoes. In Spain, in Europe, in the Americas. In every church built, in every culture lost, in every empire born from the seeds she planted. Isabella of Castile was not merely a queen. She was a force of history. And history never forgets. Like the story? Smash that like button, drop a comment and subscribe to Throne Unknown, where forgotten kings and mad queens live again.